You're locked into JJ and Alex. With the insight and analysis on the teams you can't live without. Presented by G2G Bars. This is 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back, everybody. It is JJ and Alex, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Good day to be a Utahan. The Utah Hockey Club is officially ours. Well, Smith Entertainment Group's. The ink is dried. The deal has been closed. We heard Ryan Smith last week on this very station talk about the deal being closed this week, and that's in fact what happened today. As of 3 o'clock, the press release went out, along with the release of a temporary logo and maybe temporary colors, although I think they would probably be part of that future, and that's the powder blue, the black, and the white. It's not just those.
Whoa.
What are the names of the
Mountain
colors?
blue.
Got it.
Salt white.
Got it.
Rock black.
Nice. You don't name colors unless you're going to really use them for a long time,
I
right?
think the color scheme's going to stay, and obviously they'll add in a new logo and mascot whenever they feel the time is right.
One of these people who's helping us in this journey to become better hockey fans and more knowledgeable radio hosts when it comes to being now a hockey city. Travis Yost, TSN is where you can see his byline, one of the best covering the sport of hockey. Travis, thanks for being with us again, man.
Of course. Great day to be a Utahan. I got to lose, I heard you say that, and I'm like, yeah, it is. It is a great day. I was like, I got to lose about 90% of my New York accent still, but we're making progress, guys. We're making progress.
Just pronounce Fark instead of fork, and you're well on your way.
So the deal's done. It's official, and that makes it one step closer to everything feeling real when the puck drops in the fall. So help us with this now that the colors have been kind of figured out. A handful of people were kind of made aware. We saw the trademarks that were filed for, and people obviously sort of got to leak those things. And so what do you think about the new scheme and the new color scheme, albeit temporarily, for the name of the team being the Utah Hockey Club?
Well, I know at least one of those colors is like baby bluish. Now, I am deeply, deeply colorblind, so I do a lot more about reading of the colors than I do maybe seeing the colors. But I see elements of that baby blue. It looks nice. I do think, though, it's interesting because they have the team name up for a fan vote, right? And that should be, Switzerland across the board, who, best majority is going to win there. But you look at that color scheme, or at least the construct or the concept of it, it feels like Blizzard, right? Like, doesn't it feel like Blizzard? It feels like that color scheme.
Definitely ice, right? Some kind of wintry, yeah, for sure.
It doesn't fit with Mammoth, I think, is the worst of the options that I've seen. But
really? Because Venom is terrible.
Venom's pretty bad. Venom's pretty bad, but I put Mammoth dead last. But I think it goes to exactly that point, right? If there's only, I think, 6 or 8 names they submitted out for vote, and you could pretty much, at least half of those don't really correlate super well with that color scheme, whereas some of the others, a handful of the others at most, really do, especially with that light blue. So I think this is going to also impact how the fans vote, because you see that color scheme, I think you're going to be drawn to something icy, like you said.
Yeah, it feels like Yeti is inevitable, but I want to ask you, of all the names, the 6 that they have left, what do you like the most, and what do you think they'll actually pick?
I'm going to read you the last text I sent, which was 15 minutes ago. Quote, I'm paraphrasing. Quote, Yeti or Blizzard definitely work. I'm definitely good with either. The rest of them really don't make sense. So there you go. Yeti and Blizzard, I would say, are 1A, 1B.
Yeah, all right. Title sponsor of Dairy Queen with the Blizzard, fine. Sure, that works.
I am a supporter of Dairy Queen and this hockey team, so I think that's a good marriage.
There you go. All right. Well, so that for us, it's another notch along the timeline of finally realizing that dream of the NHL, firing up here in the state of Utah. Another one today with the signing officially of the ownership over to Smith Entertainment Group. So there's that, but we're also just plumb in the middle of a Stanley Cup Final that we're praying are going to be different result in Game 3 than we saw in the NBA Finals last night, which was now a 3-0 series. Could we see Edmonton at home reeling it in a little bit against this Florida team that seems unstoppable at this point?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. Number one, you hit the nail on the head right there. Florida looks incredible. They look like a slightly more polished, and this is an insane compliment, they look like a slightly more polished, even if they're maybe not as deep, quality of team that we saw from Vegas Golden Knights last year, which is ridiculous. And by the way, I bring that example up specifically because Vegas and their depth have long been a challenge for Edmonton in the McDavid era in that division for many years. And Florida is like a cloned team of the Vegas Golden Knights. So I think that's, for a couple reasons, not the least of which is the Panthers were incredible wire to wire this year. But it's why you saw the Panthers going off as nearly a 60% implied favorite going into that series, and up 2-0 now. They're in the driver's seat to the nth degree. Couple things. Number one, on the Oilers side, they are an insanely good, maybe the best team in the league on home ice. Home ice advantage has really muted over the years. Certainly post-COVID, it's definitely had less of an effect, and you see teams winning on the road frequently now. But it still does resonate marginally. And the Oilers, when they are wheeling up and down the ice, especially in Alberta, they can look unstoppable. That offense frequently looks unstoppable at home ice. The counterpoint or the problem is, coming out of game one, I thought the Oilers were the better team of the two, and they couldn't solve Sergei Bobrovsky in Florida. And from time to time in the NHL, you're going to run into a hot goaltender, right? And it happens. They come out in game two with maybe the flattest performance I've seen from Edmonton all year. And, as a sports fan of any kind, you watch game one and you're like, all right, we play that way again, we're probably going to win. What happens if you don't play that way at all? And they got ran off the ice in game two, in frankly, probably their worst effort of the year. So this is clearly must-win territory, and I think you said it best off the top, too. It's not even like, can they win? It's like the sports world may need them to win. I don't know that I'm ready for like a Tuesday afternoon Detroit Tigers game being where I'm centering my my sports viewing experience. So let's get a deep series here because the Mavericks have failed us miserably.
Amen to that. I'm not ready for afternoon Tigers White Sox baseball either. So it's interesting because while we're following the Utah NHL hockey team now, I think we're all curious, what is the blueprint of a Stanley Cup champion? And you mentioned the Vegas Golden Knights, and they were able to do it through expansion. You mentioned the Panthers, who have been able to do it. What is that blueprint? What elements do you have to need, using a couple of these examples of what you have to do to win a Stanley Cup final? What do you need as a roster?
I think one of the most common recipes of success, if you look kind of over the profile of the last 10 years, it goes without saying you need a very talented team, right? Obvious point's obvious, but depth in the NHL is particularly valuable, and I would say on a relative basis, in very stark contrast to the NBA. It's all fine and well if you can go 9, 10, 11 deep in the NBA, but how many titles did we see LeBron carry Cavs teams that it didn't even feel like they had 5 players on the court half the time? It's a fundamentally different sport, and the reason why teams like Vegas and Colorado in years past, Carolina, even though they haven't crossed the wire yet, but the best regular season teams over the last 3 to 5 years, Boston Bruins, Detroit Red Wings preceding them, a common theme was that they could roll at least 3 quality lines, if not all 4. And ultimately, Edmonton is actually a great example of how infrequently you see teams built like that. It is very rare in the NHL to see a dominant team that is very top-heavy, centered around just a bona fide superstar. You didn't even necessarily see that with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who probably be the last example of that when they drafted Sidney Crosby about 15, 20 years ago. And yet the Oilers have made it to a Stanley Cup with a pretty top-heavy roster. I mean, the second and third pairings in Edmonton, you hold your breath watching them. The fourth line does absolutely nothing offensively. And by the way, this has actually improved over the last few years in Edmonton. They used to be a full-blown one-line team. The reason why you have seen them progress through the Western Conference now is they've got marginally more depth. And when you've got the best player on the planet by a considerable degree, you got a pretty big margin of error. That's number one. Depth is absolutely paramount in the NHL. The second piece, and it can feel like borderline gambling, like a coin flipping exercise in many cities over many markets in many years. you have to find reliable goaltending. And whether that is a workhorse goaltender, of which there are few and far between, Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg would be the best example of that. Jacob Markstrom would be another good example. Thatcher Demko in Vancouver. There are a handful of guys you could say, that guy's going to give me 55 to 60 games of great goaltending. You've seen a pretty big league-wide shift, in large part because there's been so much talent import from European markets over the last 20, 25 years. You've seen a lot more teams go towards a more platoon strategy at goaltenders, where you carry two quality, dependable, if not elite goaltenders on your roster, and you basically rotate them. It has a rest advantage, that's obvious. The other piece, though, is it usually isn't so crippling against the salary cap. So instead of cutting a $12 million check for a goalie who may flare out in 2 years, you invest in a cheaper platoon that you have a little more confidence in. We've seen that work across many Stanley Cup contenders over the years, but those two they're going to be the focus area. And I think, especially on the first point, a lot of what this offseason is going to be about in Utah is understanding we have so many young players either coming through developmental programs or already here. How many quality lines can we actually run in a very competitive Pacific Division, or a very competitive Western Conference, and is that going to be good enough for even at least being in the playoff discussion as soon as next year?
We were talking about how the lack of wanting to spend the old regime versus Ryan Smith saying, hey, let's get this done and let's be willing to spend some money here, having the cap space, having the draft assets, all those types of things that come into play. In the other sports that we've covered, how does the NHL differ in the offseason when it comes to this kind of stuff? Because, like, if the Florida Panthers win a Stanley Cup, is it like we see a lot of times with Super Bowl winning teams or NBA title teams, where there's a couple of guys on there who cash in on their success during a championship run, who will take some money elsewhere and just say, yeah, I don't want to build a dynasty here. I'll go off and take some more money over. Is it as simple as that, or is it a little bit more complicated? And will some of those unrestricted free agents who are in Florida, who might be on the docket to maybe go elsewhere, would they stick around? Is there more loyalty, is what I'm asking, I guess, in the NHL versus taking the money and running?
First off, I could take this question, and I need about 6 hours of your time to go through all the salary cap dynamics of the league, because I think it's a fascinating subject. Like, whether it's the hard salary cap in the NHL and the floor, whether it's the contract terms in length. I mean, you could sign guys for 8 years in the NHL. You can't do anything remotely close to that in the NBA. There is, how quickly players lose their restricted free agency rights and can reach unrestricted free agency and sign with any of the 32 teams. I mean, there are just very unique market dynamics in the NHL, some good, some less good, that are in polar opposite in comparison to not just Major League Baseball, which is obvious, but even the NBA. Specifically, the contract books are two fundamentally different stories. I do think, though, what you're really getting to is the player movement component. I actually think so. I mentioned Vegas earlier, and I want to come back to that. In recent years, there's been two things that I think have shifted market dynamics, and at least how teams think about roster building. Number one was when COVID hit, teams were constantly front running where they thought where revenues would come in, and by extension where the salary cap would go. So teams were constantly overspending, and they constantly were bailed out. It's like hitting your credit card. They were constantly bailed out because the league kept growing at such a ridiculous 3 to 5% clip year over year. COVID hits, and that froze for 3 years. And actually, you saw, I don't know if you guys saw, they just announced a salary cap ceiling this year, and it was like an extra $400,000 to the upside, and people were going crazy, like, finally growth. And it's like, you guys remember pre-2020? I mean, this was SOP. So you've seen teams actually use off seasons in the last few years to clean up their books, so to speak, while simultaneously going after and addressing, priority or premium talent in unrestricted free agency where they can. The last piece that I do want to bring up, because of the salary cap dynamics and because you can do things like exceed the cap ceiling within a given season, there is no salary cap in the playoffs, blah, 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 blah. The Vegas Golden Knights were the first team to figure this out, where they have found it, in contrast to historical market over the last 30, 40 years, call it, that it's easier to clean up and sell off players in the offseason when teams are generally buyers. and then for them to take on the heavy aggressive buying position within the season because they have more cap flexibility and because teams who are in seller positions, and you're going to have at least 10 every given year, frequently they're asking the question of, do I trade this guy on an expiring contract for 80 cents on the dollar or just lose him in free agency for nothing? And every time people are going to trade for the 80 cents on the dollar. So even, and ingenuity is perpetual, right? Whether it's Vegas figuring that the cap building piece of this out or other teams going forward. I do think, though, at the end of the day, it creates a lot of market movement in the offseason. And to me, from like a news and like hockey nerdistry standpoint, you're going to see an awful lot of player movement, and you're also going to see a lot of the whispers and rumor mills start to pick up pretty aggressively going into the draft. It's already started.
So do you think Utah's going to be a player in free agency, and do you think they could make a splash in the offseason?
I think they're absolutely, without any reservation, going to be a player in the offseason. The question is, how are they a player? There's two options, right? One, which I think is the less likely of the two, is they're an aggressive buyer of talent, either through free agency or players like Trevor Zegras in Anaheim or Mitch Marner in Toronto. Like, can you go out and get a real big fish, so to speak? I think the question, though, if I'm in the Utah front office is, do I need a year to evaluate this? Do I need a year to evaluate this team with so many younger players still early in the development cycle? So it brings me to the second thing. I could see Utah, in a smart way, being something of a pass-through organization for 1 year where they are leveraging their immense salary cap space to acquire more draft picks, more futures, more assets, and operate as that third team in a three-team trade and basically just reap the asset benefit, whether it's picks, players, prospects, you name it, just because they have the cap space. And again, because in the post-COVID world, growth has been slow, many, many teams in the league, especially the contenders, have zero cap space. So what they're going to be looking for to improve their teams are trades for meaningful players while trying to negotiate some sort of retained cap space. You see these deals increasingly over the last few years. It is a and actually it was the one thing that Arizona, the Coyotes, had figured out over the last couple of years. They could leverage their LTIR slots. They could leverage their, in their case, unwillingness to spend any money and realize that cap space to build the farm out. So I do think Utah's going to be very active, but I do think it's going to be more so in an investment standpoint longer term.
Travis Yost, we could go 6 more hours with you. We're plumb out of time. We enjoy every second we get with you every time we are able to chat. So one step closer today with the official news of the team being closed and owned here in the state of Utah, and the color scheme is there. So we appreciate you joining us, and we'll chat with you again as we get closer to the season.
All right, take care, guys.
There you go. Travis Yost. Yeah, he's damn good, isn't he?
He knows the stuff, which helps all of us as we.
Yeah, I'm over here taking notes.
we enter a new world in the NHL.
Yeah, I love it.
Which is fun. Right.
We'll take a break here. We'll come back. We've got more to chat about. We've got tons to break down still in the program. If you miss any portion of the show, you can always go down, download the podcast, and get all of that information. We'll take that break here. We'll come back. 97.5 the KSL Sports Zone.